The rise and fall of Egypt. The rise and fall of Egypt would start with Atlantis. Atlantis was not the land of the Greeks. Atlantis was an African empire, namely the Elamites. The Elamites who lived on the westernmost shore of Africa. Elamite land had a volcano in the middle of it. It was the most fertile land at the time. Seeds would grow in half the time, we can assume. But now there was a landslide that swallowed the whole village because of the moist soil. All that remains today is the harbors. Now they leave whoever was left and they passed by Egypt. Those who remained in Egypt stayed in Egypt, but the rest would move on to what was called Afri-Asia. Today we call it the Middle East. That was an African continent. If you looked at the map from as late as 1664, you would see that the Kushites had the gate into the Middle East. Juba, a former descendant of an African king who was conquered by the Romans, wrote papers of how African Central and Middle Eastern Central all came from a centralized power. Now the Elamites went to settle near the Susianians. The Susianians lived next door to Troy. Troy was in the north of the Middle East. Memnon was not the villain in the Scorpion King. Memnon was an African warrior who brought all the clans of the Kushites to protect Troy. He was the one who died at the Battle of Troy. So even our stories, they tell them with their white characters and change the roles that we played in them. So Memnon dies at Troy. Troy falls. But if you would look at the Roman map, in Africa, in Israel, in Turkey, they were only able to house the coast. That's the only thing they could have. When it came to the mainland belonged to us, the founders of the Assyrians, and I understand that the descendants of the Kushites. All the tribes of Israel will be reunited, I also believe. Cometh the fall of Troy, everybody moves back. Always pick up our story again when Ramses II and Nefertiti are signing a treaty with the Kushites. But now, if I was to be honest, doesn't mean the two were warring parties, because of a lion, not specifically a lion, but a tiger and a leopard go back to their mother's land to go test the power of their sister or their mother that's there. You understand? The Cleopatra that we know is not the only Cleopatra. But before we get to Cleopatra, comes Ramses III. Ramses III is now trying to stop the invasion of Indo-Europe. If you look at Venice has a waterway. Over there was called Indo-Africa.